Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here with Peter Scalzo on his 19-year cancer journey. And we've been going through your journal for weeks now, and we're getting close to the end. We probably have a couple more episodes to finish out the writing aspects. And last week we finished in an area of talking about hope, and because you spent a lot of time getting to hope, and I know we've had some conversations offline about this, so I kind of want to see if we can look at those last few journal entries and us just kind of talk about what does it look like, because I think hope is such an important part. And you kind of relied on just this passage that you talked about, a three-legged stool. And so maybe if you'll reiterate that, what you think is important for somebody in their journey, and then let's jump into your journal a little bit more and just see if we can wrap up a little bit of some thoughts in that area.
Okay, I think it's beneficial to go back to the setting of what was going on with me at the time when this whole discussion popped up. And there I was laying in a hospital bed in a room at Lenox Hill Hospital down in Manhattan, Park Avenue, and processing, still going through the wall. This was like a couple weeks later, but I'm still there. I'm going through the wall. I'm trying to do recovery. I still can't eat. I'm being supported by, nutrition and hydration through intravenously. And so I'm still in this situation where not much has actually been resolved physically, although I seem to be recovering each day. But I am recovering emotionally and spiritually. I'm on a journey. And, my first journal entries were raw about my emotions, especially fear, but anger, sadness also, and then processing God's truths, right? And so I remember laying there and it just coming to my mind. And I believe God did that, but it was that there is this concept in Scripture. It came to me: faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And I'm like, I know something about faith because it's defined in Scripture, and I know something about love that's defined too. But I don't know that much about hope. Like, to me, hope was like wishful thinking. I hope I can get to the movies tonight. I hope my team wins Sunday, And so I was like, is that really what hope is? And then I started to investigate what the definition of hope is. And so I sort of went on my own little research journey as best I could in that bed and found out that hope had a certainty to it. It was rooted in God's promises and had a certainty, like this thing will happen. I'm like, what? So hope means something will happen. And there's an expectancy with it too. And I was like, wow, that's different than the wishful thinking hope that I thought of. And I thought, but this is such an important concept for me. It's as important as faith and love, part of that three-legged stool where you need all three legs. And so that's why I went on the journey. And so I started to find out that just to summarize sort of where I was at that time, was that faith was expressed in hope, but that hope needed faith. In other words, I needed my relationship with Jesus Christ, and in that relationship, I came to trust his promises. I came to believe his promises. And out of those promises, my conviction in those promises and his truths, hope was birthed. So I needed faith first, but I also needed hope, which really brought me into this place of, hey, something really great's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet. But based on God's word, something's going to happen. And that's why I think the Abraham example for me was really pertinent, because here's this guy that was promised to be the father of all nations, and he was promised an heir, right? A child of that promise. And that happened when he was 75 years old. And it wasn't until he was 99 years old that he actually birthed, his wife Sarah birthed this child, Isaac. So 25 years went by. And but he hoped, meaning he knew God would follow through with his promise. that someday he would have a son. And so that Romans passage was that he hoped beyond hope, almost implying there are two meanings of the word hope.
Yeah. Well, and there are, right? We talked about this before. There's a lot of meanings of the word hope that we've poured into it.
Yeah.
I think the thing that sticks out to me about your journal is, we were talking about this before because I mentioned the Adam Young podcast, that we have the OG, the original guy, Johnny D, listening, and he's not on mic today, but he's here today. He's the guy who laid the journal that we've been going over onto Peter's chest back in after that 2015 surgery. And so he's listening in today, and we had this great conversation before a little bit about, what hope might look like. Yeah. And one of the things I loved about the Adam Young podcast, and I was thinking about these concepts a little bit in my own mind, and it was, he said something that was about what you see with the great people in the Hall of Fame of Faith, but you see with Abraham's journey is there's a clear wrestle that's going on. And so he knew God's promise. What he didn't know, I think, and I think that at least his actions tell us, is that he didn't know his own agency on whether those promises. In other words, he birthed Ishmael because he actually thought God needed a little helping hand to get that promise across the line. Yeah. And so he was wrestling with his own agency in fulfilling that promise. Was this something God was going to do, or did he actually need to do something to make that promise come to fruition himself? And so what I find in your journal is this wrestling with real hope. Like, what was the reliance on that? And so it gets clearer and clearer and clearer each day that you're moving away from false promises or your own hopes to God's promises and exactly what he's told you. Is what I just see that pattern in the journal. And if you've been listening, for any number of the weeks here, you started out with, there's no hope. Things are, it's hopeless. And then your words to Johnny D were, it's dark and getting darker. That speaks to your starting point. And what I love about the Adam Young podcast was he talks about surrendering, and it was in a sense surrendering to God's will and his hope. But there can't be a surrender without a fight. And those are the words. And I thought that was such a great way to think about this journey. And so anybody who might be listening to this podcast may believe that, hey, I have no hope because I feel hopeless, or I feel all these feelings. And your journal is description about the fight. Like, what we've gone through is the fight. And we're at the part of your journal that's fascinating, is that early on feelings and that place where you're at sounds completely different. We're a number of days out, I think in the 30 days out, or at the end of that hospital stay. And now you're starting to talk about just what you really do know. What hope do you really have? You haven't been given the assurance of a healing. Right. You haven't been given the assurance of even what the future is for sure is going to look like. But you were given some words from God, and you were giving God's word on top of that. And so that's what you started really connecting with, which is fascinating. And our conversation, earlier was, looking at what's false hope versus real hope. And false hope is something that generally comes from somebody else is making themselves feel good. And it can come from yourself if you're just trying to make yourself feel good. Real hope is something that's placed on something that's firm, that is real, and it's based in reality. And your whole journey is about this journey of getting to reality,
I like that. I think, I know we use the word hope, and I think for me it was like wishful thinking, like, I hope that I experience a miraculous healing. The doctors are like, this is a terminal condition. And I was like, well, I hope. There was no certainty in my mind about that. I was surrendering, right? Like what you were saying, my battle was really with fear, is what we were mentioning. My going through the wall was a lot about fear. And so a lot of it was, Lord, I'm just going to surrender to you after wrestling and wrestling and wrestling. And still, of course, that's a daily thing. It's a daily surrender. But getting to that point of of, okay, what if hope means that I'm going to expect a certain thing to happen, what do I really have hope in? Like, what can I base my hope on? And I wrote some things down.
Yeah.
I put eternity. You
Yeah.
know, I said, hey, I've never been there to heaven, but I have a blessed hope that I'm going to be there. I believe it's a certainty that I can, stake my future on. Sharing God's glory in this suffering. God was going to somehow use it for his glory. I had a certainty, and I hadn't seen it yet. I didn't know. I mean, he had told me 10 years earlier he would use this, but here I was in a hospital bed where it seemed like there was no future really at all, right?
I want to touch on that one there because this is such an important concept. And in our pre-discussion, I heard something I wanted to connect on here, but it was when you read your journal, because we were just looking at some of the entries we might cross. Will you read some of those entries that you have there and maybe verbatim a little bit, just so we can talk in that, because it gets into the hope aspects that we're talking about. I think it'd be good to go ahead and...
Now, which journal entries?
The ones that we kind of beforehand, where you were just, hey, what are we going to cover this week after the hope? And you really get into...
Oh, like the thorn in the flesh one?
Yeah.
You want me to read that?
Sure.
Okay. So this was another journal entry. Paul was sent a thorn in the flesh, a messenger from Satan. We don't know what it was, but we do know that Paul asked God 3 times to remove it, and God said no. The Lord said that my grace is perfected in your weakness. In other words, when I suffer, I depend upon God, not myself. Then God can really shine through me. I am bankrupt in myself. Why? So that God gets the glory, all of it. I don't get any, because I know that I am too weak. It is when I am weak that God shines brightest. Lord, help me to understand that this present suffering is making me weak and dependent on you. Therefore, you will get the glory. I am capable of only a little. You are capable to do anything. Suffering causes me to turn to God for each moment. When I'm healthy, emotionally and physically, I tend not to do that. So I should find joy in my weakness, because when I'm weak, he is strong.
Yeah, those are like very profound passages, because now you're explaining meaning and suffering. It's one of the greatest questions that are, why does bad things happen to good people, is this concept that you might hear, and you're putting meaning right now behind your suffering. And the thing that stuck out to me is that you said, you get the glory, I don't get any.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you now? That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
You said that.
Yeah, I think of that the same way. In other words, when a lot of times people will say to me, "You're so strong," and sort of praising me, and I know from my journey that the only strength I have came from him. In other words, I was at a point where I didn't want to live anymore. And I remember that point vividly. And I know that we all have choices to make, right? And I chose to go on a path to find God in this, even though it was so dark. I'm like, where are you, God? So I chose that. It was an act of faith, right? But I know that the meat of everything, of going through the wall, that was not me. That was God in me, working in me and through me. So, I mean, he still does get the glory of my recovery.
There's something nuanced. I just want to explore this for a few minutes, because so much of our hope has to do with how I'm going to put this like something you and I have talked about in this as we've been going through the journal, is you believed that God had given you a promise and that your life would have meaning. Mm-hmm. And to me, there's some level of definition of that says, I'm going to see something that's glorious or valuable, or with meaning by itself has some glory to it, I guess is my point. And so in one sense, you're saying, hey, I want to experience something about my life having meaning, which in my view, has glory attached to it because you can't have meaning without it being in some way, some glory in a sense. At the same time, you're saying no glory for me, all for you, God. And so it feels like one of those great contradictions that you're wrestling with in the writings of this, because you want your life to have meaning. At the same time, in these later writings now, you're saying all the glory goes to you, God, and none for me. How do you reconcile that today? And is it just one of the great mysteries, or is there something that's a little deeper there, or something that needs to be just thought about a bit in the sense of the journal? Because it feels like a contradiction to me. Some of your hope, I think, is based upon your life having meaning.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Yeah. I do resonate with the fact that God would use deep suffering for his kingdom, and that he allowed me to go through a season. I mean, really am in my 20th year of this journey, a deep, dark, long season of this thing called cancer, but suffering. And in some ways, I feel privileged to have gone on that journey, even though it's been terrible too. That's a tension there, right? I feel blessed and privileged, but it's been horrible. But I do think that, and I think he has refined me, and he's matured and done a lot of things. I'm still a big time sinner. That may come as a surprise to you, Sean.
Not at all.
But I do think, as far as, he has chosen me to shine through, to show, to display really how he can heal, how he can restore, how he can bring transformation, even in a hopeless situation. Now, I don't feel like that has much to do with me, really, except for the fact that I've chosen to seek him in the wall and to wrestle. But I feel like he did all that work. It was him that did the work.
See if this resonates, because this is something that in our journeys along the way, and I think disease and sin, death, and disease, there's a message that can be sent. And I think you got that message loud and clear, in a sense that it's the message that Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And in that kill, steal, and destroy, he also wants us to see ourselves as completely unvaluable, having no meaning or worth. And so yet you feel a great desire inside of yourself for value and worth. I think it's been given to us. That desire to have value and worth has been given to us by God himself. And so what I find fascinating about where you're at in your journal, it appears to me, is that when you got to the end of self-created value and worth, you found the greatest value and worth. And so you say there's no glory in you, and yet you found the place where real value is at. And so it's this idea of real hope is what I think I see in your journal, is this pattern of, you start out with the oppression of kill, steal, and destroy your value, a wrestle with, where does my value come from? Can I ever create it again if I have no physical abilities? And then you get to this place where, in my deepest place where I have no ability to do anything, you get all the glory, God, because only you can provide value. And it wasn't a value that came from healing. And the reason why I think this is such a contradiction is that the more we strive for value in our journeys, the more we find that we don't have it. And the more we release that to, I am valuable because the most valuable person in all the universe values me, then I'm valuable. And in that sense, I have glory. And it's hard to see myself as having glory. And it's hard for you probably to see yourself as having glory. But I see this like Jesus, like, Lord, I want them to have unity the same way you and I have unity. And I want them to have the glory that I have. And it's something that he gives. And so you're in this part of the journey where, in your deepest brokenness, when you have nothing to offer, you're now actually holding on to hope of glory. and it's not one that you can create. And so,
Right.
well, what a very profound thing to write these things, this contradiction. And it's not so much a contradiction when you think about it in a little bit more that, hey, God giving us value is giving us glory. And so
Right.
you have it, but it wasn't created by you.
Right. And the sense that I've always had through this journey, and even now, is that I can't do this journey. I'm spent. I'm bankrupt within myself. In other words, my own efforts, I can't do any of this.
Yeah.
And I know that. I know it intellectually. I know it in my soul, in my spirit, that this is not something that I have an ability to do, but God has done it in me and through me. And so you're right. I'm sharing in His glory because of that, because it's really been His.
Yeah.
It's really His journey in me, and it's His glory.
Yeah.
In me. Yeah. I'm.
This great dichotomy, this
Yeah.
contradiction is, you're right.
Yeah.
Now you're going, I'm bankrupt
Yeah.
and I have no glory. And yet your hope is in the greatest glory of
Right.
all. And I have no value, but I am the most valued of any, like this is such an amazing place to get to in the hope journey, because then the moment you see yourself not as that you've created a mountain, that you are this great mountain, the glory and majesty of a mountain in communion with the greatest mountain of communion with majesty, you have glory. And that's a great hope, to be able to see that and understand that and know that in a way.
And that's consistent with Matthew 5:3, right?
Yes.
I mean, I feel like it's been my whole journey.
Let's state that for the
with
listeners.
Illness has been, blessed are those who are spiritually poor, or who have poverty of spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God, or theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that place of poverty, I know what that place feels like.
Yeah.
Because I had nothing within me to do anything. And I know God filled the void. God did that.
Yeah.
I know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, that's why I don't get cocky about this, because it hasn't been me. It's been Him.
This is such a fascinating thing that you put this into a journal for 30 days, that it journals this place of moving into great brokenness, great bankruptcy, and great glory simultaneously, that was the journey. That's what you've documented in this journal. And I think when you get to that place where your hope isn't in your ability to perform, but you're only relying on those truths that you got to in a relationship that has deepened and grown, then there's real hope. And one of the things we talked about, false hope is when you're getting a word from somebody else that may not be true.
Right.
Real hope is hope in words or in something that is true and real and reliable. And that's the journey you've been on in this journal, is just to document that. But you had to wrestle with that.
And that's why when we use the phrase, like, I hope my team wins, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's not a certainty attached to that.
Yeah.
But biblical hope has a certainty attached to it. I can have longings and desires and things like that, and hopes, but I think I guess it's all under the same word called hope.
Well, I wanted to talk about that for a second, because that was such an important area of our desires represent something that is bigger inside of us. And so the fact that you had desire for your life to be meaningful in itself wasn't bad. I think all of us do. The question is, how did you get to it being meaningful? And so I think that desire for meaning, purpose, even greatness in one sense, that can move us either towards pride of striving and making it happen.
Right.
Your journey in the cancer space has been not towards earning it, but a journey of poverty where you found that value. And I think that's an approach that that's the going through the wall. We've documented going through the wall, and you had to face your greatest fear.
And I think that's why remember that one verse, that the outer man is decaying and the inner person's being renewed every day. I think part of the disease process is when you see your the flesh deteriorating. It's like right now I'm unable to even walk. I always love to walk, but I've got asthma issues and now kidney issues. So my glory is not in my body at all. It's in what God has done in me spiritually. That's where it's at. So, yeah. But it's interesting because the more bankrupt I became, the more broken I became physically, emotionally, spiritually, the more God could do a work in me. That's a tension also,
Yeah. Now there's something I want to re-highlight this concept of greatness isn't like fame, fortune, performance. But when you have attached value that's been given by God, what I see in you, and I think I've struggled for most of my life to see people this way, is to see you as someone, a great mountain of majesty and glory. And the moment you get to that point and you start seeing others around you of having majesty and glory, not in the sense of that we should bow and worship, but in worth. And the moment you see how much worth you've been given, it changes your perspective on hope in a really big way. And it changes the perspective about how you interact with others, which I think I've seen with you even more on the backside of this cancer journey, is the way you interact with others and seeing them in their own journeys of worth and importance becomes part of that hope in a sense. And it just changes your perspective. But it's not an earned thing where you can pridefully go, I'm a great mountain. Look how majestic I am. Can't you see my glory?
Yeah.
It's almost the opposite. I see you as a great man. I see your majesty and glory, but it's one that's given to you.
Yeah.
And that when you see that and you're able to interact in that, man, that brings such great hope, because that's relationally in a way that isn't, it's the opposite of Satan's story of you have no value.
Yeah.
You're just going to die, decay, turn into dust. There's nothing left. There's nothing of worth to pursue here. And that was what you were hit with, 30 days prior to this journal starting was, it's over, Peter.
Yeah.
Your life is going to be meaningless. These family relationships, they'll forget about you in some number of months afterwards, and there's not going to be any meaning or purpose to your life.
Right.
And God's like, no, that's not what I have for Peter.
Right. Yeah, that's great. It's interesting that it's birthed in a place of deep humility, It's not birthed in like cockiness or giftings or all that stuff.
So real hope can't come in pride. It must come in humility.
Yeah.
That's the only conclusion I can come to.
Yeah.
Real hope has to come in humility.
Yeah. And it involves surrender. It involves trust. It involves these things where we have to get out of ourselves and into a place where we're ready to surrender to Christ. I mean,
which so matches up with the Abraham story of, hey, I'm going to create a son with Sarah, not with Sarah, but Hagar. And God's like, no, you're going to have a son when you're completely unable to do that.
Yeah, and he's that confusing in between the 25 years, the waiting.
The waiting.
Yeah, I mean, difficult, heart-wrenching process, but unbelievable results. And they're not from you. God's done a work in you.
So your journal now represents something different for you. And so I think we're probably at the end of our time today. I'm going to say Jack's probably looking at, he's nodding his head yes. But we probably have one more episode to go that's going to be on something that's really important that we use in the recovery space. I'll be interested in talking on, but we'll save that for next time.
Yep.
But thanks for just sharing that whole concept of hope. It's not it's not just magically easy. It's a wrestle, surrender, and it's something that you've garnered how to rely on the real, how to get there. And this journal process was a way to get there.
Yeah. And I think we've heard tons of sermons on faith and love. So it's nice to explore hope, isn't it? To just, what is it? Because it's just as important, right?
Yeah. And I think the encouraging piece is that, and it's a wrestle. And so if somebody's here going, I don't have it right now, that's okay. Now it's like, then you're in the wrestle, and to be in
Yep.
the wrestle is not a bad place. It's not just, hey, I surrender immediately. You can't just lay down arms immediately. There has to be a fight. And so if you read your journal, you angrily
fight.
interacted with God to start with, all the way to surrender now. And now you're living out of that hope. And I think when you can get to real hope, you can live out of it as part of one of the things you get with it. And so that's pretty cool.
Wanted to welcome, and you mentioned it before, but Johnny D to the fantastic studios here at CBF, sitting next to our director, Jack. Johnny D, welcome, buddy, to this time. The man who brought the journal to me in the hospital in Excel. When I said no guests, Johnny D did what God wanted him to do.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting that what an amazing gift.
Yeah.
A blank journal.
Yep.
Being able to hear God's voice. And
I'm sure when he brought me a journal, I'm sure he didn't know 9 years later he'd be sitting in a room and we'd be doing a podcast on this journal.
yeah. And then inside that window, he's gone through his own wrestle with another dark night of the soul. And so it doesn't stop. And he's been on his own journey of real hope. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, and he's pointing to a pen. He did bring a pen with the journal,
a pen.
which is an important point.
You can't just stare at it and it happens.
No,
you
he had to bring the pen. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your journal. And thank you guys for listening. And if you want to get more resources, check out cancerandpeace.com. And we appreciate you listening.
Blessings.